Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this important and forward-thinking discussion on linking brain capital and natural capital, paving the path for a brain and nature-positive economy. Today, we gather at the still COP29 in Baku online, a pivotal platform for addressing the global challenges on climate change, sustainability, and human well-being. So it's a very important moment now because all the world is looking at Azerbaijan in Baku to act on the climate crisis we are living today. So this panel organized as part of the broader COP29 agenda, organized by the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association as part of the Mediterranean Pavilion and the Mediterranean Alliance, coordinated by the Union for the Mediterranean, and also in collaboration with the Brain Capital Alliance, which is an initiative to foster brain science and neuroscience into economic policy. So the whole concept is really reflects our collective commitment to advance innovative and integrated systemic approaches to sustainability and to well-being overall for the people. So as the global community really intensifies its efforts to tackle and combat the intertwined crisis of climate change, social inequality, and also mental health, essentially, the integration of these two concepts, brain capital and nature capital, they are so connected and so intertwined. Both of them offer a transformative systemic network framework to rethink and transform our economic models toward more well-being and more flourishing. So by leveraging really the science, research, innovation, policy, and investment, this approach can drive us into sustainable development. But beyond sustainable development is also regenerative thinking. And this is essential because really regenerative thinking, it's a bit beyond sustainability, while also ensuring human resilience and planetary health. These are all concepts that are completely intertwined and then can offer to us very good answers for the societal challenges that we are facing today. So at its core, this conversation today seeks to answer critical questions. How can brain capital and nature capital complement each other and reinforce each other to achieve sustainable, regenerative, equitable, and future-ready and positive economies? And this is what we want in reality for ourselves and the future generation. So I'm very happy here to welcome our distinguished panelists today to share their views with us. You have already shared with you the key discussion points, and then we can have this discussion today. So I would like to start with Harris Iyer. Harris is the Executive Director of the Brain Capital Alliance. and also he's a member of the advisory board of the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association and senior fellow at the Bakers Institute. So Harris will explore the conceptual and practical linkages between brain and natural capital with the focus on innovation mental well-being, based on all the work that has been done on the brain capital under the Brain Capital Alliance. And currently, we have been also launching the Brain Economy Hub together with him and other partners. So Harris, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rim. And thank you to my co-panelists. I will just share my screen quickly. So representing today the Brain Capital Alliance and the Brain Economy Hub, as well as my position leading neuropolicy at the Rice University Baker Institute for Public Policy, we believe that the brain economy is a new frontier in global leadership and certainly inextricably linked with nature capital. Our argument is that our brains are in the red. They're not doing well right when we need them in the black, when we need optimal brain skills and brain performance. So we have this sort of clash of dynamics going on that we need to think through from a systemic perspective. And this is very similar to the nature capital situation as well, where that's not doing well right when we need it the most. Some key data just to frame this up for everyone that's listening. The cost of mental and neurological conditions is very high. It's about $2.1 trillion a year. This is mental and neurological conditions across the lifespan, from autism to Alzheimer's, and this is rising at about 5% a year. So this is a sort of a significant challenge that is only escalating. This is about 2/3 of the gross national product of India, which represents a sixth of the world's population. This is a very big number. So we need to move away from thinking about our brain health as a cost, however, and view it as an asset. So asset-based thinking, which again is very resonant with nature capital as a field. The top three brain skills that we note, as we've adapted from the World Economic Forum Future of Jobs report, are analytical thinking, creative thinking, and then resilience, flexibility, and agility. So this is this point that right when we're not doing very well on mental and neurological conditions, there's a lot of struggling out there and challenge. This is when we need in the future of work really advanced brain skills. This is this disconnect that we have. So brain capital is, from the neuroscience perspective and from the brain area perspective, our response to nature capital. It's brain health and it's brain skills, those two things together. And we have recently launched this brain economy model, or a brain positive economic transformation. The goal is to go from a brain negative position of the economy and society to a brain positive one. So to stop and reverse the loss of brain capital, but to build brain capital and look at this across all sectors. So this is a model that's very much adapted from the nature positive, nature capital field. Here is, of course, a wonderful diagram from the Nature Positive Initiative demonstrating what the Nature Positive movement is trying to do with nature capital, recognizing that it's declining and they want to build back better here in the coming decades. So again, very analogous. It's important maybe to recognize that nature capital and brain capital, as Rim said, they are very much interlinked. Here is a slide that demonstrates the linkages in brief between nature capital and brain capital. Nature capital is associated with microbiomic diversity, which is important for our guts and our brains and our gut-brain axis. Nature capital means cleaner air, less chemical and plastic pollution, which is very important for our brains and the risk of disease. More green space and blue space is associated with better brain health and mental health. More nature capital associated with more opportunities to exercise. And there's also, of course, less extreme weather events. So nature capital is absolutely influencing our brain capital. And on the converse, brain capital is the seat of our green skills, our ability to engineer a green society and a green future. Brain capital is the seat of resilience, which is important in a turbulent climate changed world. and brain capital is responsible also for our resilience to just climate mis and disinformation. There's a lot of mis and disinformation around the climate swirling around in our digital environment, and it's our brains that have the ability to separate fact from fiction or to be misled. So there are some commonalities I'll say on the left here, that these are both vital assets, nature capital and brain capital. That's obvious that these are generational issues as well. When you look at the rise of brain capital related challenges and similarly with nature capital, they're high priorities for businesses and for governments. They're both very transdisciplinary, so merging and breaking silos. And they're complicated, of course. We know if we think about nature capital, that's one seeming area, but it does involve, you know, ornithology, microbiology, you know, various types of biology from the animal kingdom and the nature and ecology. Well, brain capital is similar. It's breaking down the silos between neurosurgery, neurology, mental health, teaching, etc. And finally, the challenge with both of these is how indicators will be used. There are, of course, thousands of indicators for both of these. Too many indicators is a problem, but too few indicators is also a problem. So what is that sweet spot, that Goldilocks zone of indicators that can help us to track impact and measure change over time and be useful from government and big business and philanthropy? So this is my opening intervention, Rim, to frame up brain capital and a bit about what we do and linkages to nature capital. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harris, for pointing on the interlinkages between nature and health. Actually, today I was at a meeting of the WHO, and then this was one of the key discussion points on how nature and health are intertwined, and we cannot have siloed approaches to deal with it. So we are part of the nature, and the nature is essential for our livelihood and also for our survival. So, and I think the debate is and must be in the heart of the climate action, because if we have climate crisis, then of course, not only our health, but also our nature capital are depleted directly. So it's not only about one or the other one, but both of them go hand in hand. And thank you for showing this interaction between the two. And then on the work we've been doing together, we are trying also to assess and to monitor the right indicators to understand a little bit the magnitude of the issue, of the problems, and also try to find the appropriate solutions. And that's why innovation is essential and you mentioned, in fact, you mentioned the skills. I mean, skills are essential. So it's brain health. It's not only about, you know, dealing with the mental disorders and the diseases, but also to ensure that we keep a brain healthy over the life cycle. And then we try to reinforce our skills to deal, as you rightly said, analytical thinking, creative, resilience, flexibility, agility, and also this new concept, which I think could be offering a lot of possibilities, is the ecological intelligence. So these are all concepts in reality that are new, that come eventually the neuroscience, in which you are a neuroscientist, so you know very well all these concepts are so important, and then we can mainstream them into economic policy. So I think the collaboration in reality between economics, neuroscience, and policy, and also finance, is essential. And one of the key elements that came as a conclusion today is the interdisciplinarity. So we cannot anymore afford to use siloed approaches and disciplines that completely separated. We just need to have an integrated approach, interdisciplinarity, to be able to really solve, or at least try to solve, the societal challenges that we are facing. So thank you for your presentation. So I now would like to give the floor to Borsin Ikiz, Bursin, she's the lead at Eco Neuro, and she will offer today some insights on the neuroscience research and policy framework, so how we can interconnect the two to better understand this interplay between brain capital and nature capital. So please, Bursin, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Rim, for your kind introduction, and to the EMEA for inviting me to speak at this really timely and crucial event and topic. And Harris did a wonderful introduction to really talk about the interlink between nature and brain capital. And I will try to, my best to continue this conversation. Oops, excuse me. In thinking about really how to integrate brain and natural capital for a more sustainable future through the perspective of neuroscientists, because that's where my background is. Harris did a wonderful, really way of explaining how brain capital and nature capital is collected. And when we look at brain capital, you cannot have brain capital if you don't have a healthy functioning brains. And what research, neuroscientific research shows us over and over, I have over 20 years of experience studying a variety of brain disorders, anything from neurodegenerative diseases to rare neurological disorders to more recently mental disorders. We know that the environment plays a huge role in its health. If our brains are connected to our bodies are connected to the environment. If the air we breathe, if the water we're drinking, if the food we're eating is not healthy, if we don't have access to green spaces, if our gut microbiome is not functioning correctly, these will affect our brains as well. And similarly, when there's biodiversity loss, when there's the natural ecosystems are altered, these will eventually also have real ramifications on our health and on our brain capital. And climate change really sits at the top of that, as we're seeing through these discussions happening at COP2, that climate change harms both our nature as well as our health. And the ones that are affected most, the vulnerable frontline communities that are the ones in pregnant women, children, the elderly, people with existing health conditions, are really the most vulnerable communities to the impact of climate change. And we have to realize that, so I lead a group called Neuroclimate Working Group, and this is an international multidisciplinary consortium, and where we look at the nexus of how climate change affects brain health. I mean, we were able to really gather all the evidence. This is a report we have prepared. You can see the information below. It's just been sent and is in review, where we were able to really collect all the evidence from the neuroscience point of view, as well as psychology, and where we can see the 6 climate change related factors affecting brain health. These are through extreme weather events, air pollution, exposure to excessive heat, vector-borne diseases, soil water contamination, and food insecurity. And they all are related to the planetary health as well. And what we have seen, evidence shows us that for example, exposure to excessive heat can really exacerbate symptoms of neurological and mental disorders. It can also impact our cognition, anywhere from our critical thinking abilities to memory, to attention, to executive function and decision making. These are all impacted through exposures to heat, and in the short term as well as in long term. But it's also our mental health is affected as well, especially through extreme weather events that happen, floods, wildfires. People who go through these really traumatic events can lead to have significant psychological stress, resulting in depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and this can have really long-term effects, sometimes even intergenerational effects on people, on mothers who have had experience these traumatic events while they're pregnant with their children. Their children then are seen to be more at risk for developing mental disorders later in life. we see that's kind of similar lifelong and intergenerational impacts happening through exposure to air pollution, where pregnant women who are exposed to air pollution have been shown to have children whose brain structures are changed, and they can go throughout development, childhood as well as young adulthood through a variety of neurological and mental conditions. We know that air pollution also increases the risk for stroke and neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and other forms of dementia. And many others, such as food insecurity being impacted, and that causes, especially in the first 1,000 days of life, is really critical to malnourishment. Malnutrition can cause brain stunting and brain development impacts. We know that contaminated water and soil can result in neurotoxins and other harmful particles to entering our brains. Vector-borne diseases, especially with the loss of biodiversity and the changing of the temperatures, can spread and stay on for longer periods, impacting a lot more people, which can have serious neurological and mental health secondary effects as well. While these are all scary, what I can tell you is that both our nature and brain are incredibly resilient. Given the opportunity, we see this through experiments we do in neuroplasticity and so forth, is that given the opportunities, if we can provide a clean environment, if we can clean our water, soil, air, if we can give access to increase green spaces and give access to more populations, these can really give the opportunity for our brains and for nature itself to repair itself, and in the brain's case, to be able to rewire and be okay. But we have to provide these opportunities for them to do their job of repairing. And that would go through really thinking about harnessing that co-benefits of really clean planetary and protecting planetary and brain health. And that could be through a variety of ways. One of the things we have to think about really is on how important recognizing that if we are able to protect our nature, if we can clean our environment, clean our water sources, air sources, soil sources, if we can, then we can actually be doing something for our health. So the question then becomes, how can we take action? How can we put it into the policies, in our frameworks? And that can be done in a variety of ways. In terms of for the governments, there could be more regulations that would incentivize businesses and other policies and communities to be thinking more sustainable, anything from tax breaks to having some metrics around assessments around measuring the health impacts and nature impacts. There definitely has to be raising more awareness. We have to, when we're going through these big climate discussions, it's really important to include thinking about the brain in these conversations, and this event is a great example of that. We have to educate not only healthcare professionals and policy experts and the government and businesses, but also general public around how to protect our brain health and because through that the brain capital. And we have to really think about other ways of working multidisciplinary, bringing private and public sector together, being able to find finance and innovate for a more sustainable future, which will make our nature and our brains more resilient as well. So I'm really looking forward to the rest of the speakers that will be talking today and touching base on different parts of these conversations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Borsin, for this great overview and mentioning the co-benefits of brain and planetary health. I think these are all aspects that are essential when thinking about economic policy, because we need to better understand these interactions and then also understand a bit more on what is the economic cost and also benefits in taking into consideration those co-benefits. Perhaps we will have an approach which is, I would say, much more cost efficient when we recognize and model these co-benefits upfront, not ex post. And I think these are all aspects, in my view, which determine our view about a well-being economy. Because if we take these co-benefits ex ante, then we are able to use efficiently the budgetary constraints, I would call them, that we have at our disposal, and then integrate preventive measures, not only for our health and brain health particularly, but also the health of our planet. And we go beyond what I call today at the WHO, this toxic relationship that we have maintained over the last decades between health and nature. We need to just transform this toxic relationship into what I call regenerative relationship that is not only protective for our health and mental health, but also in terms of the nature and the health of the nature, not only forests, nature, oceans, everything that is related to that. But nowadays, unfortunately, because of the climate change and the global warming, we are beyond, of course, well beyond the 1.5 degrees Celsius. This is not happening, and this is not about finance and how much money we can put into the. But then it's much more about changing the whole rhetoric and changing the whole model that we are living with. So thank you again, Bursin, for this great presentation. Now I would like to move without further ado to Kana Enomoto. Kana, she is the Director of Brain Health at the McKinsey Health. And she will address the implications of the integration of brain and nature capital into public health, education, also social equity. Kana, you have done great job and great work at the McKinsey Health Institute on to mental health in the workplace, how we have to change our way of thinking, and also at the same time connecting to this whole debate of the climate crisis. Please to you.
So much, Rim. All right, just checking that you can see my page.
Very well.
Okay, great. So in a survey that we did on what is causing distress to people around the world, looking at a range of issues, conflict, economy, climate change, COVID, economic uncertainty. In our European respondents, 47% of people reported high levels of distress due to climate change, compared to, at that time, this was 2022, only 28% ascribed a high level of distress due to COVID. And similar results from other studies in the UK and the US have found that young people in particular, as we know, are affected by climate change, creating significant distress overall, and emotions like guilt, shame, and anger. And as Bursin highlighted, there's so many intersections between climate and brain health. And what's particularly concerning about this widespread impact is its cumulative damage to people and whole communities, in terms of the diminished social inclusion and ties and collective efficacy, communal support, and shared problem solving, which are all contributing to our brain economy. And so at McKinsey Health Institute, we like to think about a world where we're investing holistically in our physical health, our mental health, our social and spiritual health, as well as in our environment. And that is going to help us not only live longer, but live better. So as we see here, sorry. We talk about squaring the curve, because from the 1800s until 2017, we virtually doubled the life expectancy of the human population. And in some low and middle income countries, we added 10 years just in the last couple of decades. But what we're seeing is that we're spending about the same amount of our lifespan in less than optimal health. And what we want to do, and I mean, I think this is like kind of, we talk about squaring the curve, and that's that light blue area where we can not only extend life expectancy, but also raise the quality of life, because we are spending so much of our lifetimes in poor health. And a lot of that toward the end of life, as we all know, is attributed to our mental, neurological, and substance use disorders and lower functioning, lower cognitive functioning. So investments in older adults, investments in brain health early in life, all of these things can contribute to greater productivity and economic value for countries as we look ahead. And this being affected by climate is such an important intersection, because we need to think about not only how are we taking action in the health system, but how are we taking action in the ecosystem and in our financing of these different efforts. So if we look at the total burden of mental and substance use disorders, right now we look globally, there's 333 million disability-adjusted life years every year that we're losing in productivity from both the direct burden of mental and substance use disorders, as well as the indirect burden of these conditions in the chronic health conditions that they are related to, as well as infectious disease. So we know that people with mental and substance use disorders have much higher rates of heart disease, of diabetes, of HIV. And so by addressing the initial underlying causes of mental and substance use disorders, we have the opportunity to prevent downstream drains on both our health, our well-being, and our productivity. So when we talk about harnessing positive brain capital, the strategies to doing this, because there's a lot of conversation about that it is important to do, but how do we do this? How do we do this for anything? I think Harris shared some great examples of making that transition to a climate positive economy. How do we do that for brain health? And I think we start by setting a bold ambition, right? We must have targeted, measurable, achievable, but ambitious goals that we can coalesce around so that we know what we're trying to achieve. We need cross-sectoral collaboration. And that's why this kind of conversation is so important. We need to integrate the brain health conversation, the brain economy conversation with the climate conversation, with the maternal and child health conversation, with the education conversation, because these things are so interconnected. Early intervention. A lot of times people think about brain health, neurological disorders, things that happen at the end of life, and those are significant. But some of the building blocks for healthy brains, for healthy cognitive functioning, for high performance, those are happening as early as, prenatally, 0 to 3, up until the adolescent years when people's brains are still developing. Scaling what works. That's what I'm going to talk a little bit more of a deeper dive here, is that we have so many interventions of things that we could be doing that we're not, right? So it's not that we don't have science that demonstrates what is helpful in promoting brain health or in treating mental, neurological, and substance use disorders. It's that we're not investing sufficiently in these interventions. And then innovative financing. We've recently co-founded the Coalition for Mental Health Investment together with Welcome, Africa Venture Philanthropy Alliance, Kokoro, and Clinton Global Initiative, because what we're seeing is that traditional forms of financing are not sufficient to scale what works, to create the level of investment to really move the needle for a positive brain economy. When we talk about scaling what works, we did an analysis on our Prioritizing Brain Health microsite that you can see that we could reclaim of the 333 million disability adjusted life years that we're losing currently if we just made interventions that we already know work. We don't even have to invent anything else. But if we just scaled the things that we already know, we could reclaim 130 million of those disability adjusted life years. And that's from therapeutics like medications, that's from individual psychotherapy, group psychotherapy, psychosocial interventions, as social support, as well as, very importantly, behavioral and preventive interventions. So things like exercise, spending time in nature, mindfulness, psychoeducation, school-based interventions. These are all things that we could be doing earlier in life to help people preserve their brain health later in life. Another thing that we've looked at is how does this play out for employers? How does this play out in our communities? And there's a lot of it's in some ways a crowded marketplace of ideas. Employers are looking to us saying, we want to address mental health, we want to enhance our workplace performance, but we're not sure. There are so many things that are out there. Where should we focus? And so we recently partnered with Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative and Us Against Alzheimer's to do an analysis of the research around mental health, workplace performance, and neurological health, including kind of subordinate disorders in those. And so what are the risk and resilience factors that contribute to each of these different domains? And where do we see overlap and commonality? Because perhaps if employers, if societies could focus on a more concentrated set of priorities, that would help them navigate kind of the very messy landscape of research and of interventions that are available. And where we landed was on these 9 common risk and resilience factors that really contribute a substantial amount of predictive value for these different dimensions, so that if we can't, like we see that community engagement, social support, stress, our predisposed health risks, our sleep, our physical activity, all of these things contribute to better mental health, better workplace performance, and better neurological health. And then on the other end of that, we looked at how does this create a source of value for employers, right? This is why are these things that employers should care about? Because there is also research that shows that if we can do these things, they relate to better retention, better attraction, more productivity, increased innovation and creativity, increased productivity, increased innovation and creativity, reduced healthcare costs, and adaptability and capacity to learn. So there's so much value to be had by looking at how do we promote resilience, how do we reduce risk, how do we look at that in a kind of comprehensive brain health view, and then have measurable impacts for employers and for society as we make these investments. And it is something that every employer can do, every community can do, because this is something that creates value for them, both in the short term as well as the long term. We have, this is just a QR code if people are interested in some of our other analysis that they can see. We've done our Coalition for Mental Health Investment, our work around systems mapping for all of the players that need to come together to address brain health and to build brain capital. And we would welcome folks to join us on our site.
Thank you, Kama. I think what your proposal of unified model for brain health in the workplace is so essential, and it is urgent for all companies in all sectors to apply it. This can be a very nice way also to structure their ESG contributions as well, because you give them a nice integrated approach for mental health. And this is essential to keep the labor in reality satisfied with in its workplace, and it enhances brain health over their contribution within a specific job. And I think this should be, in my view, integrated in the environmental, social, and governance matrix that all the companies nowadays are, in a way, required to disclose. So it's not only about the E, it's also about the other SNG, which in reality, the model that you are proposing, unified model for brain health in the workplace, it's essential. Also, the coalition is also important. You mentioned the innovative financing. Yes, absolutely. And I think nowadays we need to think of also preventive measures to ensure that our brain health remains, say healthier, so we remain healthy in brain-wise, but also take into consideration that we're moving into aging population and also in terms of the longevity. So obviously we need to ensure that, as you mentioned at your beginning intervention, that we are living longer but less healthy, and that's not the whole idea. The whole idea is, yes, we live longer, but then we need to be healthier, not less. So thank you very, very much, Kana. Now I'd like to introduce Julie Hiromoto. She's a partner and director of integration at FAIA and also at the HKS. Julie, we had the chance to meet in New York. I would like to understand a bit more in this conversation about the role of urban planning and architecture in fostering sustainable brain and nature-based environment. We had a fantastic discussion back then in New York, and I learned a lot from you. So please, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Is my screen sharing?
Not yet.
Thank you. Let's try that again. Let me know when you see it.
Yes.
Yeah, we got it. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Julie Hiromoto. I'm an architect, systems and design thinker with HKS, a global design and consulting firm, a policy advisor, a dot connector, and an integrator as the mayor's appointee to the Dallas Environmental Commission, and a socially and environmentally responsible advocate as an NGO observer delegate for industry organizations like the American Institute of Architects, 95,000 members at COP26, and Architecture 2030 as a COP28 delegate. Thank you, RIM and EMEA, for inviting me back to speak at your COP's Blue Zone Pavilion again. It's really such an honor to be here. I was asked to address these two questions today. How does design and the built environment influence brain and nature capital? And what are some urban architectural and infrastructure strategies that we can deploy for brain and nature positive outcomes? So if I could, please take a moment to think about where you are right now. What are you doing and what do you sense? And would you have noticed this if I had not prompted you? The built environment is ubiquitous. We spend about 90% of our time indoors, and that other 10% is still in the built environment, designed by someone, hopefully intentionally, unless you're in a virgin natural environment. We're going to spend the money to build and renovate, to enhance, to retrofit our built environment anyways. So what if we think about this strategically and purposefully, where we live, where we work, play, learn, heal, build community, and rest? What if each of those could be designed to leverage our cognitive potential and our nature potential? We already know that the built environment is invisible and under-leveraged positive force for change. And it's critical to the systems change that we're all working towards together, especially here at COP. We know that climate and carbon are significantly impacted by the built environment, over 40% of the global carbon emissions. We know from the work that the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation has done that public health is specifically tied to the zip code that you live in and directly impacts longevity in the US in terms of disability adjusted life years. And we know, as several of the speakers have already mentioned, that policy is critical to establishing a baseline for minimum performance and to incentivize best-in-class results, especially when we're building and retrofitting one building at a time, one park at a time, with different groups of people across the communities that we work in. So I'm really excited to share with you that we have launched a Building Brains Coalition. We brought together academics, business leaders, philanthropy, investors, government officials, and NGOs all across Texas and beyond to help us to start to shape what does a future of intentionally and purposefully breaking down those silos, as it was mentioned, to build brains together, to bridge those disciplines and bring together industries for this collaborative potential for cognitive flourishing. Humans have a natural tendency to connect with other life forms in nature. And this term biophilia comes from the Greek words bio meaning life and philia meaning a friendly feeling towards, an affinity towards. Katie Ryan at Terrapin Bright Green was one of the guests at our recent United Nations General Assembly Science Summit symposium on brain capital for One Health. And she's the co-author of this seminal report, this design guide that connects us with nature, and it's celebrating its 10th anniversary now. We know how to deploy these strategies to reset your brain, to calm your mind, to focus your thinking, and to shift your perspective to perceive a different point of view. And the patterns of biophilia are organized into bringing nature or the feeling of nature into those spaces, really focusing on dynamism and this difference to our kind of super homogeneous, hyper controlled artificial consistency, air conditioning, kind of stasis sense, as opposed to the dynamism of nature. It focuses on analogs of nature, so different patterns or complexity, order and hierarchies, and then finally the characters of space. And these characters of space are often found in nature. And it's all connected. These are the 8 goals of the Dallas Comprehensive Environmental Climate Action Plan. And let me just give you one example to help kind of connect these dots. Trees and planting in general produce shade that reduces the urban heat island. And Bertram's already talked about the damages to our bodies and to our brains about heat. But you also perceive this dappled light through the tree canopy that manifests these complex patterns, which are essential for resetting your brain and taking brain breaks. The sidewalk separation on busy roads provide pedestrian safety and comfort, and thus physical activity, which is good for our brains. They provide wind and buffers and shading when you put them at the building perimeters, and this reduces our heating and cooling load and the associated greenhouse gas emissions. If we build with trees and wood, it's a rapidly renewable resource that sequesters carbon, can be easily reused as part of a circular economy. Plantings help us manage stormwater, provide soil stabilization, and the storm and flood damage. Barsham also talked about this extreme stress that it creates. Plants enhance our water quality, support wildlife, and the wonder and species that come with, integrating with the birds and the insects. And species diversity is something that's really important for thriving ecosystems and modern science in terms of pharmaceutical research. Because they clean the air we breathe, our indoor and environmental air quality are also improved, and the associated damage of particulate matter crossing the blood-brain barrier and other issues diminishes. So here are just a few examples of work that we've been doing at HKS to think about how we connect cognitive load, burnout, memory, loneliness, these kinds of topics with the built environment. In learning spaces, we know that we can support and advance social and emotional competency of young people by providing enriched environments. So by that, we mean, how are you considering motor, social, and cognitive sensory stimuli? And that sensory stimuli is often coming from those patterns of biophilia. That's a really easy way to do that. A welcoming environment and a variety of spaces where students have autonomy and choice for multimodal learning. Healthcare, when thinking about burnout and our healthcare providers and healing environments, these respite spaces are so essential to allowing them to perform at their top of license. But if they're far away at the other end of the building, then they're feeling the guilt or, time away from their patients and unable to monitor those patient needs. So how can we create those respite spaces closer to where they're delivering the care instead of mandating them to have to go somewhere else to take a break and reset their brains? In terms of memory in living spaces and slowing cognitive decline for individuals with dementia, making people feel safe and comfortable and joyful and really awakening their senses helps to kind of delay cognitive decline. So in 2023, we worked with the Center for Brain Health to identify 5 affordances for brain health specific to our work environments. And these affordances are conditions that would specifically help us promote strategic attention, integrated reasoning, and innovation. The image you see in the background is our Atlanta office. And if you could imagine being in that space that doesn't look like a typical office. It has plants, it has, views across the city into the treetops in the surrounding neighborhood. If you think about your workplace environment and how you do your work, how and where you focus should probably be something very different from how you build social connection with your team. And so our job as the architects is not just to create the space, but also to work in conjunction with the leadership of the organization and also the people that are operating on a day-to-day basis to make sure that the policies and the communication and the culture align to promote these brain healthy workplace habits so that together they amplify stronger brain health. So on the bottom right here, you see a heat map where we've observed people doing different tasks. And the case study here is that we looked at our old Atlanta office location and our new Atlanta office location. And we've really densified and diversified the space, reducing the rentable square footage by 38% and increasing the full-time occupancy of more than 3 times. We reduced the area dedicated to just workstations, like rigid static workstations, to less than 20% of the floor area and planned for a 60% average daily occupancy. And these in combination resulted in a 65% reduction in rentable square footage per full-time employee. So going from 178 to 115 square foot per person. You can imagine the cost savings there. But it wasn't just driven by a real estate cost savings and an investment in construction materials. Paired with this brain training, we really did a collaborative effort to focus the work on doing one thing at a time, single tasking. We all know multitasking is bad for us, and it's not as efficient as we think it is. We saw with a 17.5% reduction in multitasking that the focused tasks that were completed during a day went up significantly, almost 37%. And that by intentionally taking breaks, people were replenishing their mental energy that was required to finish these tasks. More brain breaks equaled more focused tasks completed. And the result, as Kana was sharing, is that our employee retention has gone up. We've had a reduced number of voluntary departures and resignations, and our engagement has gone up according to our annual Gallup survey that tracks our employee engagement. So these are really exciting statistics to share with you. And it doesn't stop just within the building. We're also thinking about how we design the in-between spaces. This was created by our Cities and Communities team, and our Global Practice Director, Sheba Ross, talks about creating an urban design framework rooted in intentional and contextually grounded planning principles that unlock the potential of spaces between buildings to promote brain health. The thoughtful design connection fosters relaxation and movement, transforming these areas into more than just pass-throughs. They become vital spaces for social interaction, mental restoration, and sensory engagement. By integrating local context and human-centered principles, we create environments that reduce stress, inspire creativity, enhance well-being, offering vibrant, meaningful spaces that elevate both the mind and the community. And the last thing I'll share with you is that, we need to be thinking about this on a more global and inclusive basis. This impacts everyone, everywhere. Last year, a lot of positive movement in Africa with the Yaoundé Declaration, which many of the folks on this call were directly involved in, but making a commitment towards integrating brain science to inform economic decisions and public health decisions across the continent. Also at our UNGA Science Summit, we had two speakers along with Katie, Christian Benimana and Mei Ling Loco, and they reminded us that 80 to 90% of the world today builds without architects. So we need those self-build resources. And we need nature-based materials that sequester carbon while providing those biophilic benefits. And while we're providing that, let's think about the supply chain. Let's think about the manufacturing environment and the brain health and brain capital opportunities in those communities. If you think about a traditional factory where they make the current building materials, and you think about the factories that make bio-based materials like insulation that's grown from mushrooms, the factory environment is incredibly different too, in terms of, you know, a kind of serene or more peaceful and humane place to work. So many things to think about. Thank you so much for the time and for including me in this really exciting conversation.
Thank you, Julie. This is really very exciting work that you're doing. And I think there is a lot of potential everywhere in the world to change this view about design and urbanization. Actually, we have a very interesting project at the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association, which is Community for Living Areas. And it's basically trying to change our territories and urban design of the cities. And I think this brain science and brain capital and all the discussion that you provided today could be really an integral part of it. But you see, the problem is to change the mentalities and to connect with the right expertise to ensure that, for example, the knowledge that has been developed over the years in neuroscience is also integrated in the inbuilt environment. This is not easy at all to implement, because sometimes you have the role of the cities, the role of the municipalities, and there is a lot of education, you know, and upskilling and reskilling to ensure that this is embedded and also valued. Right?
Yes, integrated and intentional, right? Because by the time the design team is brought on board, someone has already written the brief and said the building's going to be this big with this many rooms and it's going to be on this site. And we need to move further up the food chain to make sure that the intentionality behind brain capital and brain health is at the forefront, at the very impetus and the start of the origination of an idea for a real estate project.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Julie. Now I would like to introduce our friend Shiva Dusta. Shiva, she is the Dean of the European Investment Bank. European Investment Bank, it's the green bank globally, and maybe one day it will become also a brain bank. So Shiva will discuss with us the financial innovations necessary to support brain and natural capital initiatives globally. So please, Shiva, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Rim. Do you hear me? I hope the connection is fine.
Perfect.
Now, I do not actually have slides, so I don't know whose screen this is, but I'm not trying to confuse you with slides. I'm very honored to join this conversation, and really, I've been listening to all the panelists before me, and I was like thinking there is it's such a multifaceted topic. Let me maybe start my intervention with two questions that I also asked at the UN Science Summit in New York on the brain economy. And they were basically the following. How much are we willing to invest in our brain? And how much is our brain worth to us? I've been thinking a lot about this particular topic, really also coming at it from the perspective of the European Investment Bank. So we are the bank of the European Union, meaning the 27 shareholders our shareholders are 27 member states of the European Union. And we are also kind of aspiring to be the climate bank, and very much working towards positive climate action and having aligned all our investment activities to be in line with the Paris Agreement, and targeted at least 50% of our lending to go towards positive climate action, environmental sustainability. So there is, in that sense, a very strong climate focus. We, however, also invest billions every year in health, in infrastructure, health systems, but also research and development. And therefore, sort of looking at this topic at the brain economy is something that clearly, as a public sector investment bank, we ought to, do so in a much more intentional way. But I would say at this stage, certainly I'm looking at it from the angle of foresight, which is part of the institute. So this is the EIB Institute's activities. We are the philanthropic arm, the think tank arm, the part of the bank that deals with universities, and really also in that sense trying to future-proof ourselves, taking a forward-looking approach in what is coming ahead and what is in particular the role of investment. And I think this is where I would like to draw on our experience both in health as well as in climate, to show that, in a way, what Julie was saying earlier, which I found fascinating. I mean, we are obviously an important investor, but perhaps what we're not doing is bring that intentionality of bringing a brain economy or brain health lens to the investment. And this is where I believe our foresight work with many of you who are on this particular panel and many others will be very, very transformational for us as a public sector bank. But I really hope that we bring in an investor mindset that then brings private capital and private investors on board. So let me start maybe with some of our experience on the health front. And here it's a very personal experience. Over 10 years ago on infectious diseases. Back then, for us, investing in vaccine development, especially for vaccines that would go, it was also seen for many of these vaccines on development, they would be in malaria, in TB, in HIV, for poorer countries in the world. There was not, the investment case, the business case was not immediately sort of there. And we also did not necessarily have the right investment products to channel money towards the research and development of those products. And it basically was in the very close collaboration and looking at this with the European Commission and also with the many national entities that were putting grants and subsidies into those research projects, that we agreed that it would actually make sense to have a financial instrument where, instead of a grant that would actually just go once out and you never see that money again, to put that grant as a risk-sharing buffer, as a guarantee, so to speak, towards the EIB, so that we would be able to actually go beyond the risk thresholds that we would usually be able to go basically into projects that would, as we would call, not necessarily be bankable. So you can see those loans as either forgivable loans or the grants as repayable grants. So they would really go into those vaccine, for instance, vaccines under development, under diagnostics, under cures in those infectious diseases. And we then, in 2015, launched an instrument under Horizon 2020 Innofin program, which was called the Infectious Diseases Finance Facility, which very much brought this intentionality to proactively look for such projects to invest in. And of course, while it seemed, I have to admit, quite esoteric for the EIB sort of to have that lens, but as you can imagine, in March 2020, it was a godsend to have an instrument that had this very sort of clear focus and the right financial sort of parameters, metrics, and in particular the risk appetite, to then rather quickly mobilize hundreds of millions for vaccine developers for COVID, including also BioNTech. So in that sense, what I think the lessons learned here is, and I think infectious diseases is yet another, I would not necessarily want to say that this is the same, it's the same as brain disease, because I mean, we're talking, of course, of very different potential characteristics, investment needs, and so on. Nevertheless, the lesson learned from an public investor perspective is that it is so important to look at these things early, especially as a public investor. We need to be an anchor investor to help de-risk and mobilize private capital through our patient capital that comes in earlier, stays in longer, and do so in close in close collaboration with other public entities. In our case, it was the European Commission. We have very many risk-sharing instruments, as I mentioned, that basically ensure that instead of putting just grants into the system, they come into into financial instruments, and basically are then ready. So the lesson learned is to be ready, to be ahead of the curve, and put our mark. I think here in that context, I would also like to briefly refer to our experience on the climate front, and I think we can draw a lot of lessons, and I think Harris and Burchin and Rim and many others have alluded to. In the case as an investor, in 2007, it was the EIB and also I think the World Bank that had the visionary sort of approach to develop the concept of green bonds or climate awareness bonds. These are now instruments that are very commonplace. Many companies and governments issue such bonds, but at the time they were actually quite innovative. And what they helped to achieve is that ultimately the risk of an EIB green bond is the same as an EIB regular bond. It's a AAA investment asset, and therefore the single distinguishing factor is in fact the use of proceeds, meaning there is an agreement that to an investor when they buy a green bond, that the EIB will use those proceeds of the green bonds towards projects that meet the criteria that have been commonly agreed under. So it was the International Capital Markets Association that sort of helped over the years to standardize what that would mean, and the EIB sort of internal technical teams to kind of identify whether a project that we would lend to would qualify to be eligible under these green bonds. And this is, if you think of it, a very, an important way to actually allow those investors who really would like to have that intentional investment towards, in this case, climate action, positive climate action, sustainability, to have an instrument to do so. Over the years, we have also issued sustainability awareness bonds. Those actually have a broader remit. They are linked to the SDGs. And in some ways, you could therefore argue to the health SDG, bringing in also brain is somehow implicitly in there. But of course, this begs the question more broadly, what would it help, and what are the conditions necessary to really take a step further and create instruments in the future that really bring much more intentional capital towards the brain economy? And I guess here what I would like to sort of share is some of the questions that certainly then investors would ask are, where are those investment needs? Listening to Julie, I think you can see that the built environment, so we're talking in large infrastructure, or any infrastructure, you could argue you really could bring in a brain economy lens or a brain health lens to it. And indeed, so what are the investment needs there? If you really wanted to make sure that you actually create and finance the buildings that bring all the benefits that Julie was highlighting. But if you look at the whole value chain, whether it's on the education side, whether it's on the research and development side, and this is every time I now engage with scientists like Harris and others, they tell me a lot of foundational basic research is still needed. So the question there is, are the governments putting enough money into this? And if they have budget scarcity, how can we actually tackle the allocation issue? How can we ensure that capital is flowing where it should flow? Because clearly, we do need to ensure that we have the science advancing enough for then the commercialization. And this is where, of course, from an investor perspective, you're more likely to be looking at really the investment opportunities by biotech companies, by pharma companies, by digital players, whoever they are that would produce products or services that would actually make our health, improve our brain health, or mitigate the brain or lower the disease burden of brain disorders. So therefore, the questions, what is not very clear, I would have to say to many of us, when we're looking at it with an investor lens, is where are the financing gaps? Where is it where really we could actually move the needle by having a strong public investment program that would then mobilize private capital? And I hope that therefore, as we get more, become more granular, and I know that the McKinsey Health Institute, Kana and her colleagues are looking at it, and many others, in our ecosystem are looking at the next level down. I would therefore say, whoever is listening and is developing a better understanding of where the gaps are, to really work with us, because my take is that we do have many financial instruments that could be mobilized and capital that could be mobilized if we had a better understanding of where it should be mobilized in order to really make a difference. And therefore also the notion that, I think it was Ilikana that who brought the notion of scalability. A lot of the innovations are already there. They need to be scaled. So that also means that we need to look at financial instruments, growth capital that help scale those innovations. And this is certainly something that we are very much aware of, is often a financing gap, especially in the European Union, where we are actively now developing growth capital mechanisms to actually put investments into the scaling of the innovations. So I would like to perhaps leave you with the notion that whilst a lot of money and investment is going into health, perhaps what we're lacking is the understanding of, when it comes to the brain economy, where the gaps are, and and again, for every investment, you need a borrower, or you need an issuer, or you need a promoter. You need somebody who actually is, who needs the money. So it takes both sides, so the demand and the supply. So what we really need to better understand is, where is the demand coming in? Because my take is there is so much capital out there. It's really first and foremost going to be also a capital allocation issue, and not that there is not the capital out there, which, as you know, is also a challenge that the climate challenge. It's a challenge also in the climate finance space, that we need to find ways to channel more capital where it is most needed. So with that, I would just like to thank everyone. I mean, the EIB is very certainly at the institute level, we're very proud to be part of this conversation, and really hope to be able to broaden the community of investors who are curious at the first instance and are eager to learn more about the investment opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shiva, for your insight. I think this is very important, and obviously, when we start a new field, always, we have those constraints to think about and to overcome. And I think this discussion, connecting brain capital and nature capital, is so important because we can learn from the both, in fact, and try also to define the co-benefits that Bursin has talked about at the beginning of her introduction. So I think there is a lot of work to do, and we are all here working and contributing to this transformative model that we would like to see going forward. Thank you very much, Shiva, for this. Now I would like to invite our friend Gramenos Mastroianni. He's Senior Deputy Secretary General of the Union for the Mediterranean, host of the Mediterranean Pavilion in Baku. So he's dining in from there.
Mm-hmm.
So Gramenos will bring us the regional perspective, and also how do you see all of this embedded into our thinking in the Mediterranean to drive sustainable development, but then through these two concepts, which are the brain capital and nature capital. Please.
Well, Reem, I'm going to disappoint you in the sense that I'm very grateful for this invitation. It is a breath of fresh air. I take care of the political side of climate change, and I cannot really say anything as representative of the Union for the Mediterranean. We do a lot of good things, but we're not so advanced as to examine these aspects. But I plug in with my academic research, so it's very personal. This does not represent the Union for the Mediterranean. You have been talking a lot about brain health. I would rather talk about brain power. First of all, we have given ourselves an instrument to achieve sustainability, which is called the 2030 Agenda. The end result of an applied 2030 agenda can be called One Health. There is an absolute equivalence between health and sustainability. The problem, and here comes brain power, is that we have trapped ourselves into some cognitive restrictions that are preventing some natural wiring that we have to understand some values from functioning. And this is the deep, deep origin of the bad situation that we are in. The background is that we have a natural wiring to understand the value of balance, but through recent innovations, we have dragged ourselves into the adrenaline of living in a totally imbalanced situation. Climate change itself is a distortion of balance. It's a distortion of the energetic balance of our planet, through which we accumulate a lot of energy that our system is not prepared to receive. It's really a lot of energy. It's the equivalent of the explosion of 400,000 atom bombs per day. This induces a chain effect of imbalances in the ecosystem, but also induces irrational behaviors in the human sphere. I'll give you a very simple effect. A very simple example. The hotter it is, the more I use air conditioning. The more I use air conditioning, the more I have emissions. The more I have emission, the hotter it will be. So, if we try to understand what are the root causes of this terrible situation that we have imprisoned ourselves in, is exactly a cognitive impairment that has to be overcome. And there are many aspects, but I would like to touch upon two tonight. The first one is that we lost the capability to understand the fundamental relationship, which is that what is good for me is good for my planet, and what is good for my planet is good for me. And this induced us to a series of economic practices that are causing emissions and trash. That is, we are surrogating ecosystem services with artificial equivalents, which are not giving us the same result. Let us start, for instance, from nutrition. You know, if we want to be healthy, we have to eat according to what dietologists call the nutrition pyramid. A little bit of red meat, a little bit more of other animal origin proteins, but then a healthy diet is basically provided by a lot of fibers, vegetables, fruits, and this kind of things. Well, as it happens, if you pair this pyramid with the pyramid of the impact on the environment of the production of each category of food, you discover that there is a perfect correspondence. The more a certain kind of food consumed in excess harms my health, the more its production harms the environment. And you would be tempted to say, oh, what a coincidence in the sector of nutrition, but it's not a coincidence. It works in every sector of our life. Take, for instance, our transportation choices. The more we choose, it's a compressed choice because it depends on the infrastructure or when we live, but the more we choose a kind of transportation that leaves us with more money in our pockets, with more human rhythms, with a better socialization, with a better health, the more it is sustainable. The same thing happens with our hygiene choices. The shower that really protects our immune system is also the most sustainable. It's short, it uses very little chemicals and things like that. So there is a general rule, which is what's good for me is good for my planet. And it's not magic, it's not metaphysical. It's just the result of what we call co-evolution. When they teach evolution in schools, they give a misperception. It's as though the survival of the fittest is a game which is played inside their species. But the survival of the fittest actually develops in relationship with the whole system that we are part of. So the end result is that we are made, shaped, wired to be healthy, happy, in the best possible situation with our environment. I'll give you another example. Imagine a very hot day. Our modern people reflex would be to seek a segmented service, which is refrigeration. And we go to seek it into an artificial surrogate, which is called air conditioning. We go to the shopping mall to get refrigeration. Okay, we get refrigeration, but we get it at a price. There will be a thermic shock. There will be sneezing. There will be a surrounding environment which is very heavy on our brains. The humidity rate will not be the right one. If instead you choose to place yourself beneath two trees, suddenly you find yourself with the temperature, humidity, sound environment, visual environment that builds your well-being. Now, until not so far ago, our brains were wired to recognize this correspondence. And we can elaborate on it. I don't know how much time I have, but let me just give you another example. There is a debate, vegans, vegetarians, omnivores, and things like that. I mean, I respect very much ethical choices that take into consideration empathy towards animals, but we are omnivores. And the quantity of meat that we should eat is small. What a miracle. If we eat exactly the quantity of meat that protects our health, it tends to correspond to the quantity of meat that a certain territory naturally produces by respecting the dignity of animals, that is, by having them live a free life on the fills. And by the way, this quantity of meat, instead of being a problem, a burden of our climate, is carbon absorbing, because it's exactly the quantity in which the absorption of carbon from the atmosphere, which is caused by their dejections, poo in technical terms, which fertilizes the soils, is major than their emissions in methane. So we are really made to be happy, free, and in the best possible shape if we are in tune with our environment. This was a wiring that we used to have in our brain power that we totally lost due to mass production that induced us into segmenting our priorities. And actually we elected one priority, which is something that we could call easiness and comfort. And to name easiness and comfort, we lost quality, we lost all these varieties and things like that. So, there are architects in this conversation, but there are also health sectors.
Yeah.
Call upon them, as I did with other colleagues of yours.
Only 1 minute, because we need to wrap it up.
One of the things I did in my life is that I'm one of the founders of the One Health conversation. Doctors are very powerful. But the other thing that we have to cope with, it's another lost capacity that we have, is what we call border bias. We are custodians of a balance, and this balance is global. There is the illusion that you could protect your own local balance from imbalances outside, or your sectorial balance from other imbalances outside, but it doesn't work. In 2000, two professors at Utah University ran an experiment with the students. They invited them to groups, and there was a control group to which they told a story. Town located 8 miles away from a nuclear plant that exploded. Then these people were exposed to films and pictures about the aftermath of the explosion. The second group was exposed exactly to the same stories and films, but there was no different story. That is, they told them that they were living 20 miles away.
We have an issue to hear you. You are cutting a little bit, but you don't have much time anymore. If you can summarize it, that would be great.
Well, once I can stop it here, it depends, because you cannot hear me very well. But in any case, I had some elements to contribute with that. Let me tell you one thing. We need a brain power which we have lost, which is the capacity to integrate different aspects. This has been induced by, especially in the West. It's not a problem in other civilizations, but the West, which is leading economy, has been induced into an over-specialization. Adam Smith's theories were understanding what's happening, but then someone came after him called David Ricardo that introduced an innovation, which is specialization. This had heavy economical consequences, but it also had a cultural consequence. It made people think that non-specialized thinking is dysfunctional. We see it in our day-to-day practices. And not so long ago, we used to go to those general practitioners when we were sick. We entered in their offices, and after 3 steps, they would tell you, you have a problem on the right eye. And you say, how do you know? It's because you're leaning on the left. So they were considering the general balance of the person. Now we only go to the general practitioner to have prescriptions for the specialty. This is not our natural wiring. We were made to integrate knowledges, situations, and things like that. It's up to the specialists, to the doctors, to the philosophers, to the economists to recover it urgently, because we are where we are, because we are segmenting and not integrating. Thank you, Reen.
Thank you, Gramenos. I think you mentioned many concepts that are all important, that all new, and that we need to think about them. But certainly the field is huge, and we need to develop more knowledge. So before closing this conversation, I would like to ask each one of you for one recommendation that you would like to transmit to the leaders before closing the COP29. So I will start with Harris.
Great. My hope for the COP29 leaders is that they help us with the Brain Economy Hub that we just launched today, which will house a Brain Economy Systems Change Lab, which will look at key shifts in each sector for building brain capital and nature capital, and then targets and indicators. So that's across all sectors. Thank you.
Thank you, Harris. Bursin.
Thank you. My hope is that we really add the conversation around brain health and planetary health into any climate discussion that's happening right now, and that we bring the word equity. We talk about access, we talk about funds, we talk about research coming and having full representation to the whole entire world.
Thank you, Bursin. Kana?
Just like everyone to remember that as we unlock 133 million disability-adjusted life years, we stand to contribute 26 trillion to the global economy. And as we are prioritizing brain capital, we are also focusing on the rewarding aspects of great brain health. So that's people having joy and meaningful activities, laughter, spending time with family, building relationships. And so this is our collective responsibility. And I look forward to working with everyone to building a world where everyone has the opportunity to live a healthier, happier, and more fulfilling life.
Julie?
+1 to everything that's been said. Keep the power and the potential of the built environment front of mind as a key lever of change to realize the climate and the brain economy transition for regenerative life and flourishing for all.
Shiva? Shiva on the move.
Sorry. Yes, well, what I would say that it's no longer an either or, health or climate. These things are, going hand in hand, and therefore also for the investor community to take a very integrated approach to really channel the investments where they are most needed.
And the final word for Gramenos. Unmute, please, so we hear you.
There is no trade-off between environment and development. There is a trade-off between unhappy development and environment.
Thank you all. All is recorded. Thank you for your time today. And then we will keep working toward an economy that is a flourished economy, and also for ourselves and for our planet. So thank you. And then we continue our work. Have a great day.